Good morning and welcome to the Eclectic Radical. As always, I'm Chris Richards, the Eclectic Radical. It looks like we have someone new in the chat this morning. George Coggins says greets from Scranton, Pennsylvania. Good morning, George. It's really great to have you on the show. Also with us as returning is our returning friend of the show from West Virginia, the chair of the West Virginia Democratic Party Indigenous Caucus, Seth Sturm. Welcome back, Seth. How are you today?
Thank you. I am well, Chris. How are you?
Well, I'm feeling pretty good. We went for a drive yesterday. It was a nice, fun ride. For everyone who doesn't know, I live in the Portland, Oregon area. We drove down from Washington County, which is where I live, just southeast of Portland, down to Albany, which is, for people who don't know, Oregon is down past the state capital, Salem, south towards Eugene. So I had a nice drive yesterday with my wife. We had a good time. We're feeling pretty good. So, I'm in a good mood. Thanks for asking.
Well, it's great to hear. It's tough to be in a good mood sometimes nowadays. So
It really
good on
can
you.
be. It really can
hmm
be. And it's not great here. We have corporate Democrats who keep getting more and more conservative every day because they can. There isn't really anybody to their left. And
Right. I mean, that's happening all across the country, though. The
but
shift to
but
the right is
I mean, in West Virginia, though, the Republicans run the state, so the corporate Democrats being the opposition is even worse.
right. In our state, they've already sold out, decades and decades and decades ago, and they just keep doing it. And it's to the point now where these people in the Democratic Party, who are the corporate Democrats, who are basically on the payroll. I don't want to say on the payroll, but you get it. Those people are the ones they're heading up a dying party, a party that has zero power. The Republicans have a supermajority, can do anything that they want, basically. And then you have Democrats who will turncoat and vote with the Republicans. So we don't have an opposition party at the moment. That's one of the reasons why you're seeing such terrible bills coming out of West Virginia. We had our the trans sports ban was blocked by one of the higher courts, which is good news. So it's not enforceable at the moment. But it's just crazy here. They're getting away with everything because there's nobody speaking up publicly. There are a few, of course, but it's not a concerted effort. There's no organizational effort by the Democrats to stand up to what they're doing. And you're seeing the results of it every legislative session.
I would say with Democrats like Jim Justice and Elliot Pritt, who needs Republicans? But then I remember Jim Justice and Elliot Pritt are Republicans.
That's right. And here's the thing. The Democratic Party has no problem creating people like Jim Justice. And it's created people like Joe Manchin. It's incentivized running to the right and, courting Republicans over building something to the left. Anything, even center. We don't have that in this state. We have people who are, by and large, right wing corporate people, and they're running as Democrats, and they run the party most of the time.
As someone who can tell you from experience what it's like living in a blue state, all those quote unquote centrist corporate Democrats are right wing. I mean, there's not a fundamental difference between the police policy on the local level in Portland, Oregon, than there is on the police policy at a local level in Atlanta, Georgia. And they're both blue cities. Georgia is a traditionally red state going sort of purple again. Oregon is a safe blue state. Both blue cities. But the police politics are the same in both cities. The cops are the same in both cities. The quote unquote Democratic mayors are really right-wing authoritarians in both cities.
Well, yeah, I mean that's true. It's awful. It's so frustrating when you see that the mechanisms of power, whether and it's not saying it's not different or it's not unique in each place, but you still see the mechanisms of power being used against regular people. It's a class thing, or a, like I always call it, the club. You know, it's like these people that run the show, these politicians, anybody with influence, power, clout, money. They live in a bubble. You know, they live in their own sphere, and they really don't like to be bothered with our problems. And you see that in the cities. In it doesn't matter if it's a blue state or a red state. The people with power are incentivized to keep their power, to keep their influence, and to marginalize, ostracize, castigate anybody who's a threat to it, and to keep the people at the bottom at the bottom. I mean, it is nice, I imagine, to be in those positions and to have the say. You know, I have the final say. That's probably a really good feeling, and that's a problem. You know, and that's, I don't know how you get around that with the current system that we have, because we always have, every level of leader has that big head about them, and it's you see it's not working out.
And you've got that system of hierarchy where every step in the hierarchy demands the proper degree of respect from everyone below them on the hierarchy in order to do anything for them on the most basic level, or
Right.
not to punish you for no reason sometimes.
Well, this is a perfect opportunity, and I don't want to talk all the time about me and my Democrats nonsense here, but there is something to that. So, to speak to what you just said, there's going to be a hearing on Friday. It will probably be broadcast live on the West Virginia Democrats YouTube channel, where I have a grievance before the Board of Appeals. And what I fully expect to happen is that it's a grievance to recognize the Indigenous Caucus, because there's no reason that they shouldn't. It's in our charter, or it's in the DNC charter. It's in our bylaws. We have the infrastructure. We have the people in place. We've already existed. Like, there's all of this stuff. And there's this unilateral decision making by these people who really have it in for me. They dislike me. So I'm fully expecting this hearing to become a personal attack on Seth Sturm, and all of these things will come out, because that's all they have. And it's not.
I'll tell you exactly what they'll say too. They will say that, you know, the Indigenous Caucus dissolved itself and said that it was dissolved, and said that it didn't exist anymore. So why should we suddenly accept that it exists again now?
Right. And here's the funny thing. I got to put this out there, because I don't know if I'll get the opportunity at the hearing. One of the members of the Board of Appeals, there's 3 people on it at the moment. One of the members, and perhaps the president of the board, don't quote me on that, is former Speaker of the House Tim Miley's wife, Susan. Susan Miley wrote an email started a whole email chain with me a year and a half ago, because former delegate here in West Virginia, Cody Thompson, claimed to be Indigenous, according to his DNA ancestry results. And I said, I don't believe him. And he wouldn't give, it was this whole thing, but she came in and said that I had no right to question his ancestry. Well, when he lost election last year, he attacked me on Twitter and posted his DNA results, and he doesn't have any Native American ancestry. So here's this woman who attacked me, used the color of my skin, because I'm light skinned, to say I didn't have any right to represent the Indigenous Caucus. And I didn't have any right to question this other person who claimed to be Native American. And this person told me, she's told me already I have no right to lead the caucus, and she's going to be one of the people making the final decision. So I'm going through this process, and like, I know people rightfully so question my working with the Democrats, but it's something that people should watch, because you're going to see discrimination and racism on full display from people with power, from the state level Democratic Party here in West Virginia.
Sure.
and it's something that people need to be paying attention to, whether or not you like the Democrats, because this kind of behavior is
Well,
metastasizing across our culture right now.
I think it's tremendously important that people who don't like this watch so they can see what the Democrats are doing in West Virginia, which is supposed to be a state that is organizing along progressive lines to get rid of Joe Manchin and start taking the state back from Republicans. These were the high-flown promises of the people who are in charge now, if I'm remembering correctly.
You are remembering correctly, and what we're seeing now is a complete shift to the right, which was predictable. When it's a midterm season and you're electing new leaders, you can be a little bit more bold in your messaging. But then when presidential election season comes running around, they totally change their tune. They're totally different people now. And what they're pushing, and we had a vice chair who wasn't a particular fan of mine, but she was somebody who did represent a lot of this woke culture, if you will, weaponized or not. I can't speak to that. That's something that's a different issue. But she was somebody who was at least vocal about issues regarding LGBTQ rights, racism in society at large. Whether or not she stood with people in the party, that's a different story. This vice chair was, I don't want to say pushed out, because she got a great opportunity to be the executive director of the ACLU, but she was replaced with a woman who is an attorney who fought the Citizens Oversight Board for a police department here local. And it's just, you see this shift from somebody who wasn't it
not a police department? Wasn't it a police union?
She represented the union in fighting that particular oversight board for that police department. So it was.
No, but I just want to be clear about this, because this is what police unions are. Police unions are not representing cops in labor disputes. Police unions are plaintiffs in in law enforcement overreach cases to get the government to allow cops to overreach more.
Right. And you can see why they picked this person, why they nominated this person, why they fought for this person, is because they've made this shift. They don't want to be seen as the party. It's basically, we've got a Target situation where you have these small minority of people in West Virginia. I don't believe that it's everybody in West Virginia. Most people have given up on the system. They don't vote. They're not engaged. But the small minority of people who are bigoted, prejudiced, they're intimidating. And rather than stand up to them, we capitulate. So it's just like Target removing their trans pride display because of the terrorist threats. It's exactly the same thing, because these people are the ones who are scaring the Democrats into being reactionary.
I really believe that somebody's telling themselves somewhere in a room, as we escalate towards Nazism, someone in a room is telling someone else, we have to be tolerant of the conservatives. We don't want to make them feel rejected.
I think that's the biggest problem too, is that they've lost. I think that, I don't know. Part of it, I think, for Democrats is that elite attitude that we're better than everyone, that morally superior attitude, even though they're not oftentimes morally superior. And what that leads them to believe that everybody that's not voting for them is this bigot. Well, how do we get people to vote for us? Let's be a little bit more bigoted.
But at the same time, they have no problem, joining with the bigots in the legislature, because those guys are elites in the legislature too.
Oh, absolutely. See, that's the thing. And whenever I say, the other thing is that it doesn't necessarily show a disdain for that bigotry. They might harbor some of it themselves. It's that they think that their bigotry isn't the same. They think that these people's bigotry is based on stupidity. And so they feel like they're manipulating people, even if they share some of those bigoted ideals. The way that they message and the way that they present these facts to the people and the way that they run their races is what shows the difference in how they think the regular people behave and think and how they think. I think that's, I don't know if I'm making sense, if that makes sense what I'm saying, but I do think that there's they, like I said, I don't think that a large percentage of people share those things. It's just that they think that they do because of whatever reason. They think they're as reactionary as they are, for all I know. But it's a problem here in West Virginia, and maybe I'm speaking specifically about West Virginia because I know that a lot of the people in power are engaging in racist behavior themselves. So it kind of it shades the way that I'm looking at this because it's two sides of the same coin. Oh, hold on, I've lost.
You get the liberal mindset, and by liberal, I mean conservative as well. You get the liberal mindset that says we have to protect our interests as a social class. And that's where we get into Gira's question here. I'm totally down with getting rid of Manchin and the whole big cobalt machine behind him. But how do Dems fight against the power of money? And the short answer is they don't, because they're getting donations from the same people as the Republicans. And I mean, the reason that Seth is so hated by West Virginia Democrats, despite being one of them, is that he's pointing out that they're not really any different. Am I wrong?
You're right, because there's two. It's Marianne Clater. She hates whenever I bring her in and lump her in with me. But there's two people that will consistently, and I mean consistently, call out when something happens that's wrong, when discrimination happens, when an action is taken that's against the rules or that oversteps boundaries. You can guarantee that Marianne Clater or myself will say something if we know about it. And there are others who will stand up when they need to. But there are people who I like, who I've held accountable before, because it's just what you have to do. It's not about building friendships whenever you have these relationships. It's about having a working relationship to get the job done. And see, that's the problem. Nobody's doing anything. We have a lack of action, which is what's causing a lot of this inaction at the polls. You want people involved. They want people to vote Democrat. So they just want to snipe the people who are active in the Republican Party. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. They don't have any reason to engage with independents, non-voters, people who have given up on the system, when if they could organize effectively, they could bring those people together against those GOP folks, because there is a broad coalition that's available here because so many people don't vote, but they're not interested in that.
Well, and honestly, it comes down to the fact that the Republicans are their kind of people, and the people that they would have to organize to win power from the Republicans aren't. I mean,
right.
If you have more in common, with your fellows, with your peers in the state legislature, than you do with your constituents, then it is really easy to feel like it is the legislature against your constituents rather than you against the opposition party. And this is where you start seeing, so the first time you really saw it was Hillary Clinton in 2016, where you really saw a candidate say things that were sort of designed to directly shame voters either into voting for her during the election or not voting for her after the election. And how did that work for her?
It didn't. It didn't work for her.
Exactly. So you look at that and you see that's not that saying you have to vote for me because of these Republicans is ultimately not the way to win. You would think they would do something, but they don't. They keep doubling down on look how bad these Republicans are, which gives them no reason to be any better as long as they can look better and sound better.
And I mean, it's so crazy to me, too, that there's not even an attempt to we're losing really badly here in West Virginia. I can't speak for the Democratic Party as a whole, but in West Virginia, it's really, really bad. I mean, I can't understate just how little power we have and how little influence we have at the moment for people within the party to be fighting these infights, to be fighting against one another. Why is the Democratic Party fighting against 10 active indigenous people who have a caucus from doing the work to help bring more people into the party?
Let's go back to the original question, though, because, I mean, I like you. Obviously, I'm on your side, but people are going to ask, what is the answer to, well, did you dissolve, or were you always a caucus, or why should we
voted
now?
So what happened was we dissolved in a bit of a protest. The thought, what you do publicly versus why you do it. We dissolved in the attempt to force the Democratic Party to take action, because our thinking was the memorandum of understanding that created all of these caucuses outlined that there was to be an indigenous caucus. The bylaws say that there's to be an indigenous caucus. The DNC charter implies that there should be a Native American caucus. So all of these things, why would we be able to? So we voted to dissolve, citing these incidents of racism. The thought was, let's make the party discuss the future of the indigenous caucus, right? We take this action as a smaller affiliate group within the larger executive committee. Nothing happened for 9 months. So because of that, because there was no new election, there were no new elections called, according to Robert's rules in the bylaws, until there is a new person, or until there's new elections called and the party has taken action, I'm supposed to do what needs to be done, if anything needs to be done for the indigenous caucus. That's my responsibility, right?
Sure.
So according to Robert's rules, the last presiding officer of an organization, if there is none, can call a meeting of that organization. I did that, an emergency meeting of that organization, in accordance with the WVDP bylaws and their rules for announcing or noticing meetings. The first order of business was to make a motion by somebody so you can make a motion to reconsider the previous motion.
All right.
If it's the first order of business, and that's what we did.
So I get you now, and I'm going to stop you because we're getting into Robert's Rules of Order, and while I'm very interested in the arcane intricacies of Robert's Rules of Order, I don't think the average person watching the show is. So
I'm not into it either.
I'm going to try to simplify, and then I'm going to throw a question back at you to see if I'm right. What I'm hearing is that by the rules of the West Virginia Democratic Party, if an organization doesn't exist anymore, then it is incumbent upon the last person to run it to act in its stead until a new organization exists.
So that would be
yes or no?
Depending on, so it would depend on who you had interpret the rules. Yes.
Based on your argument under Robert's Rules of Order, is that correct?
That's right. Yes, that's my interpretation. Yes.
Yes, exactly. That's good. So, with that in mind, with that being your interpretation, then the next question is: so then, with the understanding that it's your job as the last person to run the Indigenous Caucus when it exists, to sort of keep track of what's going on in that area until a new one does exist, you then called an emergency meeting of the former caucus after 9 months of inaction and said, hey, this did not work pursuant to such and such legalistic argument from the party bylaws. We're the caucus again. Are you guys up for it? Is that basically it?
That is it. And here's the thing to remember. I believe, I would have to double check, but I believe every single person who voted to dissolve voted to reaffirm and to come back, or whatever you want to say it.
And
So,
that's and that makes sense too. And from a Democratic point of view, it is supposed to be the Democratic Party. That is what they call themselves, right?
right. Well, and here's the thing.
But from a Democratic point of view, it seems like the Indigenous Caucus is doing the right thing to me. But more importantly, and this is where I'm coming from, is that because of the way Robert's Rules of Order works, and because of the way the bylaws are written, your argument is you have a legal right to do this under the party rules because this is the appropriate action when all these other rules were not followed.
Right.
Okay. That makes perfect sense. And so it's ultimately the party's own legalistic mumbo jumbo is why the Indigenous Caucus has the ability to dissolve itself and come back, which is to say, these are your rules, follow them.
Right. That's what we've been saying. Here's something really interesting to think about. According to the party's just newly adopted affirmative action plan, which lists the Indigenous Caucus as one of its caucuses, we still exist. So, since we agreed to have completely new elections, just every position, including mine, every position, new elections, notice this. This is what we asked the party, and they wouldn't do it. So my question is there an Indigenous Caucus? And if so, why are we not allowed to have new elections? And so all of this stuff that's going to come out on Friday, all of the stuff they're going to try to paint on, throw at me, the question's going to remain, why is the party not allowing the Indigenous Caucus, which it says exists, to operate in a way that it's been operating in the past?
I don't mean to put you on the spot, but do you have a link to what's going on Friday to share?
I can share. I would just share the. I don't think I can share the Zoom meeting. I think that's just for participants.
Oh, okay, so it's a Zoom meeting.
Yeah, and I think it'll be live streamed on the Democratic Party's YouTube, which we can easily get a link for that. But I think it'll be live streamed. Actually, I'm going to write to get verification on that because I want eyes on this. I want witnesses to come. I want watchers for sure.
So that's really the question. Will it be live streamed? Because if it is, that's something I would encourage people to watch, because that directly shows how dysfunctional the Democrats are, and it really demonstrates how little headway there is to be made by working within the party. And I applaud that you are willing to make these sacrifices to teach this lesson. I got somebody's got to. I do think that you would run your head into the wall less if you started working to organize outside the Democratic Party. But I have to say, we need people to create to demonstrate this lack of accountability over and over again so that people understand it. Because if we're really trying to organize, we have to be able to educate people. And part of education is being able to say, this is what the West Virginia Democratic Party did to the West Virginia Democratic Party Indigenous Caucus in 2023. And here's Seth Sturm to talk about it.
Okay, go ahead.
And that's the sort of argument that really needs to have to be made over and over again. You can't just run Bernie Sanders for president. Somebody has to be there and say, Bernie Sanders ran for president, and look what happened.
Right.
And you can say, this is what happened in 2016. This is what happened in 2020. This is why running for president is not going to solve our problems in and of itself.
Well, and to speak to that point, so you're absolutely right. And I want to point this out. The Democrats, the Democratic Party leadership, we're talking about three people who have made trilateral decision making to exclude us. This could have been easily avoided. And you're right, this can be used, not, as a Democratic Party official, I can't say that it should be used or whatever, but it is going to be used, and it can easily be used to highlight the hypocrisy of this party. These people have and listen, I'm going to say something that may get me in trouble, but you have people running around using the term woke fascism and all of the. Well, what they're talking about has been the weaponized wokeness and the selective outrage that they see from Democrats.
But
and they've taken that. And I'm not saying, hold on, I'm not saying this. Hold on, I'm not saying, hold on. I know that's what I was getting ready to say. I was getting ready to say that. Honestly, that's what I was getting ready to say. They've taken that and they've twisted it into this entire thing that's inciting all of these mostly white people into getting really angry about things that are social justice issues, things that are good. And it's a lot of the disingenuous nature of and I'm not saying that they're right. I'm not saying that that's the reason. These people are bigoted. They're not. It's an excuse, but it's the same thing that they're doing here. We've given them the ammunition through our actions to create this, and it's the same thing they're going to do here with this hearing. They're giving the ammunition to the people that they know easily fixed. Have the indigenous caucus. You're going to have it anyway. But they're going through this fight, and it's going to be humiliating.
We need to stop. We need to stop indulging this whole idea that anything the people angry about wokeness are mad about is really necessarily even woke. We're talking about basic human decency, people. I mean, that's what gets me so upset. It's this. You're saying that it's this radical idea to say people have the right to exist as who they believe themselves to be. I mean, it's so basic. We're talking about, now, I've argued against autonomy before because I don't believe that autonomy is a good thing. I don't believe anyone is ever autonomous. I believe we have a web of social relationships that sustain each other and that make us and that interlink us. And that when we isolate ourselves from that and treat ourselves solely as individuals and nothing else, that's when we do ourselves the most harm. So I have some problems with some of the autonomy arguments that people make. But let's remember that the liberals and the conservatives are the autonomy people. And so let's keep in mind that on a basic autonomy, on a basic level of individual autonomy, the queer bashing is the most ridiculous hypocrisy possible because you're violating the autonomy of the people you say you're fighting to keep autonomous. So it's just, there's no justification for it under the liberal arguments for the system that exists. And the only way that you can fight against that is to fight against the idea of liberalism, which is what you see conservatives do over and over again. And then in order to get people really fired up, you lie and you call liberalism socialism.
Right. It's all about the lie. That's the point. That's the point I was trying to make, to be clear, is that it is all about creating this narrative, and they use whatever they can, and that we should not give them that. It's easy to not. Okay, so how you take that fuel away from them is to be consistent. If you act morally, then you don't have that issue of selective outrage. So that's my point, is that we can be better. And I'm saying this as a Democrat. No, I understand most people aren't, but we could be better.
But the argument to this, though, and the thing that we should be saying over and over again, and by we, I mean anyone whose political bent is away from capitalism and towards socialism, what we should be saying is, this is not woke. There's nothing woke about the Democratic Party. The West Virginia Democratic Party is engaging in racism to justify queer bashing and queer bashing to justify racism. and doing both to justify keeping a specific number of people who happen to be white in power. And that's really the thing that people don't understand about systemic racism, is it's not that specific people are acting in a personally offensively racist way against specific other people. They may be, they may not be. In this case, some people have. But the systemic racism is not about whether or not somebody does a morally objectionable racism on a personal level. Systemic racism is about sustaining the specific power of whoever happens to be in power, and the fact that because of the whiteness of the system, the people in power are either going to be white or are going to be sympathetic to the problems of whiteness. And I will then add that the so-called problems of whiteness are arguments that white people make up to justify why they can be racist without being racists.
That's one of the things that I've noticed with the people who engage in racist behavior, is that that's their mantra, right? Is that it's not about racism, it's about you specifically. I'm talking about you specifically. They've taken these actions to prevent someone like me. They've done these actions about me. It's not about, so there's just one incident that I find really offensive. Within the Affirmative Action Committee, they had created a subcommittee they called it the Planning Subcommittee. This committee created a survey that they pushed out across the board that was not that wasn't authorized by the committee at large. It was a whole big thing with us. But then when they got the results back, I think there was something like 100 plus responses. They would not release the data to Marianne Clater or me. They, at the meeting, said they couldn't release the data. They would go back to their caucuses and ask their caucuses if they could share their data. Well, okay, who's going to vote to allow them to just share data? But the reason they cited was that they couldn't trust people on the committee. You're collecting this data in the name of the committee, and then the white people say that the Black and Indigenous caucuses can't have access to this data. That sense of propriety, it elevates them to this level above us. Well, we don't think you can handle this information that we own, that we collected in your name, so we're not going to give it to you. And we never got it. I mean, information that we requested that's supposed to be on the public record, videos that were taken, that exist, they will not send them to us because they contain incriminating audio clips. And they get away with it. They're able to push us off to the side and say, no, you get what we give you in this Affirmative Action Committee. And I'll tell you this, the creation of the Affirmative Action Committee has hurt representation in the Democratic Party here, because I feel that they just view it as, this is where all the minorities should go. This is where they belong. Put them somewhere in the AAC as an example. The chair of the AAC, somebody that I've named in my grievance, Selena Vickers, she tried to get Zandria Lansdowne to run for an at-large position on the executive committee under the AAC umbrella. It's an AAC at-large seat. That's what they're referred to as. She supported her for that position. When Zandria ended up not running for that position, let somebody else have it. And she ran for vice chair of the party. When she ran for vice chair, Selena voted against her. And rumor has it, I can't verify this because I've not seen the original email, she participated in the smearing of this woman and spreading around a false survey that was supposedly done by Zandria with the Alliance Defending Freedom, a hate group. So we have this situation where if you're below me, I like you. I want you to be on that. You do it under the AAC, that's fine. Put you above me, put you in a position of real power. We don't want you. We can't have that. And so I think that's a great, that illustrates the point of this, they pushed everybody off to the side. There were 3 people that held positions, higher up positions of leadership. I don't know how they would refer to them within the party, but, vice chair positions, 3 Black people. Officers, thank you. Yes, officers. 3 Black officers. Now, none. None. And we
What
have
is
this
the
thing now where it's like they
question?
have this.
I have to stop you here because I'm familiar with some of the bureaucratic history. And as I familiarize myself with the history of the problems of the West Virginia Democratic Party, I know what question to ask here. What does the Affirmative Action Caucus think about the complete loss of black officers within the West Virginia Democratic Party?
It's a great question. Here's the thing. One of the issues is the Affirmative Action Committee. I would like to go back through over some of their minutes and agendas. I don't think discussing affirmative action or increasing participation of marginalized groups in the party, which is our stated goal, I don't think any of that has been on the
Well,
agenda very much. And so that's the issue. We don't discuss it. They don't discuss it.
Here's where I'm gonna step out of my interviewing hat and put on a teacher hat for a moment and talk to this for when you're talking and talk about this for when you're talking to other people in bigger media someday, which really should happen eventually. But so don't over answer the question so much like that. I'm asking you. I'm setting you up when I do this. This is a friendly interviewer question that you would be really lucky to get in any other media. So I want to go ahead and point this out again. I'm asking you very specifically, knowing the history and knowing you know the history too, what does the West Virginia Democratic Party Affirmative Action Caucus think about the fact that there are now no more black officers in the West Virginia Democratic Party?
I don't know.
See, now there's the answer. There's the answer. And the reason I say that that's the answer is because we really have to stress right there that this is the systemic system that we are fighting. The system that we are fighting allows a white woman, Selena Vickers in this case, to dominate the Affirmative Action Caucus in such a way that it does not represent the interests of the people on whose behalf it is supposed to be acting affirmatively. Now, I point that out because I have you on the show time and time again, and we keep saying the same things. And the reason we keep saying the same things is they aren't changing. And the reason they aren't changing is they have the power not to change. This is something everybody needs to understand. When people talk about why you can't change the Democratic Party, what Seth is going through is what we're talking about. When they say you don't change the Democratic Party changes you, they are pointing out that you have to have certain unique personality qualities, which fortunately Seth does, in order to keep ramming your head into that brick wall over and over again without getting brain damage and giving up and joining the system because you're so tired of getting hit in the head, you just want the pain to stop.
Yeah. You see that happens time and time again. And I feel badly for these people. I've had people reach out to me and say, I agree with you, but I can't help you because they don't want to suffer what comes with being and standing up against these folks. So that's one of the things that keeps me going, honestly, is that especially minorities within the party, rank and file people, not necessarily higher ups because there aren't any, but rank and file people will say to me, you've inspired me to start speaking out, and that's what I hope I do. I don't think I can change everything. I don't think anything is going to. So here's the thing: I'm all about results, right? So if there's a third party option, I'm not opposed to it. And the Democratic Party cannot have a loyalty test in there for my participation. Mm-hmm. So I'm open to say that. I'm not opposed to third parties running. I just want to, my position is that I have to do my best because of where I've been placed and the people that I know and where I'm at I have to fight back against the racism that I'm witnessing at the Democratic Party.
Yes.
I don't discourage anybody from working outside of the system, from being there. I'm not a cheerleader for the Democratic Party, is
Well,
what I'm
no,
saying. I'm doing what I'm
I
doing because I feel that it's right. That's why I do it. That's it.
when people talk about an inside out campaign, an inside out strategy, this is exactly the sort of thing that it actually means, actually opposing those institutions from within. And the inside out strategy that groups like DSA talk about, where we get people elected, and those people who are elected then act on our behalf, that's clearly not working. But we can have an inside out strategy where we can join some of these institutions in order to be a persistent thorn in their side, in order to point out the need to organize outside these institutions. And I don't think that's completely worthless. I think it's important to show the how the Democratic Party works, and that is an educational project. I do warn people not to think that they can win.
Well, here's the other thing that I don't want people to forget. In West Virginia, if nobody speaks up, there are a lot of people suffering. And my hope, whether you like it or not, there are really a lot of good people that are at the lower levels who just support Democrats, who, for whatever reason, they're there. We're there. Those people are good people, and they shouldn't suffer their I'm not sure that they'll walk away from the party. So it's got to be nice for them to have people that will stand up to those in power when they do these things that are wrong. I mean, that's at the end of the day, what we're talking about is people behaving badly. And if you listen to those people, you'll hear a lot of stuff about me that simply isn't true. But it's projection a lot of the times because of how they behave and how they act and the way that they take retribution on people and they harass people and do all of these crazy things to intimidate and coerce and manipulate. That's not my goal. So it's just about doing what's right. And so, yeah, I agree. There's a lot of problems with the Democratic Party. I encourage people to go where they feel they can accomplish the most. And for a lot of people, you're not going to weasel your way in like I did to the Democratic Party. They will absolutely destroy you before you get the chance. So I don't, it's not that I'm advocating one way or the other, but I do hope that people pay attention to what's going on in West Virginia because it also I've flirted with the Green Party before. There are issues there too. So pay attention to what's going on here because it can help you over there.
It's true. And, there is no such thing as a perfect party.
Right.
That's if somebody wants a perfect party, they're going to have to organize it. And it's going to and it's not going to be able to work solely within the accepted confines of liberal democracy right now if it wants to accomplish anything. And people aren't willing to consider the kind of organizing that needs to be done right now, the direction that we need to be moving right now. And this is the part that really frustrates me the most, people are not willing to understand that there is no short-term rescue, that their hopes that somebody will win an election and right the course of the ship and the long-term project of revolutionary action isn't going to be necessary, are ignoring the fact that, there was a chance to right the ship in 2008. There was a chance to right the ship. Obviously, he was never going to keep any of the promises he made. But if Trump had been serious about cleaning up the swamp, he had the chance in 2008, and he didn't do anything except the usual Republican stuff. There was a lot of drama and a lot of hullabaloo, but when it comes to what his actual policy as it affected American citizens goes, he was a fairly normal Republican president. Now, you can definitely make the point of the fact that his importance as a Nazi focal point is tremendously important. He has given new life to the white supremacist movement in the United States in a way that it did not have before Trump was president. It was starting to get there, but Trump was what they needed to get where they were going. But now they're interested in other people too. They're interested in other things too. It's not about one president for the right. The right has plans for the future. The right took over the Supreme Court because of long-term strategic planning. And the Democrats did nothing, even on a long-term defensive scale, let alone offensive scale. They did everything they could to appear non-political, to make the Republicans look bad, so that the Republicans would pay a price at the ballot box for what they were doing with the Supreme Court, that the Republicans have not actually started to pay until they won. And if the Republicans have won and replaced the Supreme Court with Nazis, then what does it matter that now they're starting to lose political traction? The Democrats are not in a hurry to undo any of this damage.
That's the thing, is what I spoke about earlier with the inaction. There's no effort by any of our quote unquote leaders in the Democratic Party to fight back, other than with a few of their words sometimes, but their actions don't actually fight back against what's growing. And there are some members of Congress who are in these 3% organizations that are. This is a terrifying step in the wrong direction.
Even just on a basic performative level, how does it look when Nancy Pelosi is on one? At first, she's ripping up one of Trump's speeches to show her contempt for him, and then not too long later, she's on national TV applauding his denunciations of socialism.
Right.
So here's the thing: when the public thinks that's when the public sees Nancy Pelosi applauding Trump denouncing socialism with all these other Democrats, they think socialism is a bad thing. And then when Republicans call Democrats socialists, they're not thinking, are the Democrats really socialists? They're thinking Democrats, socialists bad. Even the Democrats say socialists are bad. So when the Democrats applaud Trump attacking socialism, they're applauding him attacking them. Do they not understand this?
It's that thing about running to the right. You don't want to see. I can't be seen applauding socialism. Of course, I'm against socialism. And it's that same thing. They're doing. Okay, so here in West Virginia, I'm watching these people trying to prop up this person running for governor. I'm not going to name names because I actually kind of like the Republican that they're propping up just a little bit, even though anyway. But the point is that they think that they can beat him. They can't. Anybody you prop up, you're only hurting yourself. Even if he wins the primary, which I don't think he will, even if he wins that primary, you're not going to beat him. So the work you're doing is only helping him. You're not doing some subversive thing where you're going to, play 3D chess or 5D chess, whatever they say.
Because
it's not happening.
What happens when he wins in the end because of this game you're playing? He's still a Republican. Is he going to undo anything that Jim Justice did? Is he going to remember that Democrats gave him a boost in the primary and as a result not continue to sign really horrible laws?
No, that's the point. And they can't see that. They're so myopic in their outlook and their strategizing that they don't make these decisions that are easily made here and now on how we do things. They keep making these mistakes, and you're witnessing in West. I always speak about West Virginia. You're witnessing the destruction of a once powerful party, and it started with Joe.
Democrats ran West Virginia for years,
for decades, even. But what happened was it started with Joe Manchin. Whenever they started getting this shift to the right, well, it started with Bush. Whenever he took that was the first time West Virginia went red in ages.
So let's be honest. Because I understand it started with, we're always seeing it from our point of view. But history never really starts anywhere.
That's fair.
History is a process. if you want to say where we have a start for sort of this sub-process of history, you've got to look first at the way the civil rights movement ended, and second, at the way Democrats started acting politically in the 1970s.
Mm-hmm.
The best bellwether for this, even though Joe Biden was actually one of the first, the 1973 election is one of the 1972 and the 1972 election was one of the big places where this changed. In 1972, you see a lot of people jump on the peace movement as purported liberals, despite being very high-positioned capitalists. And so you saw things like bank presidents and Chamber of Commerce people, the sort of people who would normally be running for office as Republicans are not running up for office at all. Running for office as Democrats on the anti-war Vietnam argument in order to get all these very liberal voters, and then not actually do anything for any liberal issues other than the Vietnam War. And in these other issues, they actually became increasingly conservative. The bellwether, though, is 1978, because 1978 shows the perfect example of the change in the way Democrats did things. In 1978, in Massachusetts, one of the two senators was a Republican named Edward Brooke. Edward Brooke was from the black professional class. He had come up in Massachusetts where segregation was economic and unspoken, but very real rather than open Jim Crow. But nevertheless, that economic segregation still meant that, in fact, there were black worlds and white worlds within Massachusetts at the time. He was one of the people who started to change that just by the way he went about his business. And he was important for serious bellwethers of what we call the Great Liberal Reforms. He co-authored the Fair Housing Act. He was one of the co-sponsors in the Senate of the Civil Rights Bill. He was fundamental in rallying Republican votes for progressive legislation under both when Lyndon Johnson was president and when Richard Nixon was president. So this is someone who's tremendously important to what the modern Democratic Party would call the history of the Democratic Party, except he was a liberal Republican in Massachusetts, and at the time, these institutions were not completely co-opted by the Democratic Party. So, in 1978, a white congressman named Paul Tsongas ran against him for his Senate seat. At the same time, a white Somerset prosecutor in the congressional district that Brooke lived, even though Brooke was not in Congress, he was in the Senate, but this is how close it was. It was a prosecutor in the congressional district where Brooke personally lived, named John Kerry, was running a criminal investigation of Edward Brooke's divorce. Now think about this. A political official of another party is running a criminal investigation of another politician in another party's divorce. Just when you talk about political corruption, it's not a new thing. And the political corruption we see now is not unique. They did this dirty tricks against Edward Brooke in 1978, where John Kerry had a criminal investigation of his divorce case in order to help Paul Tsongas win an election.
Right.
And so now, And then you turn around and you say, well, that doesn't mean that Trump isn't really a criminal. And yes, Trump is really a criminal. I want the Democrats to investigate Trump harder than they're doing. That's a whole big thing is, the fact that Trump is only being indicted now is because they feel like they were forced to by the obvious things that he did in the media. And when Republicans lie and say he's being persecuted, and worse, when people who claim to be socialists and who are watched by a lot of socialists lend credence to the idea that Trump is somehow being persecuted, it really undermines them when they call out Democratic corruption. But at the same time, the reason they're able to do it is because this is the Democratic Party's track record. They do this all the time. The fact that Trump does it to himself by existing, and the Democrats are trying not, because remember, they didn't send Edward Brooke to jail. They just made sure he lost an election. Now, the consequences of that were serious. I mean, that's when you start seeing a very conservative movement with that new Congress and Senate in 1979. Those are the people who became Reagan Democrats in 1981 after Reagan was president. So you have to understand how all this fits together. And it's just this corruption feeds into these ridiculous conspiracy theories because people can see that the system is corrupt. But no one is willing to call out the system and say that Democrats and Republicans are both symptoms of the same corrupt system without then giving one side or the other a pass with this great big, but we have to vote for, and then some excuse for Democrats, or but Ron DeSantis, and then make some ridiculous justification for why we should pretend to believe Republicans have good points.
Right. And that's the thing is that, like I said, the Democrats have created this, and I don't want to say that they've created it because it was already there, but they've given the ammunition for people to grow these movements around hating Democrats. That's something I encounter all the time. People can see what I stand for and what my politics are. They don't really align with mainstream Democratic politics, but I'm in the Democratic Party, so I get that hate. And I get it, but there's been an entire movement around just hating Democrats, and they leverage that into getting people to support really bad things. And I think that people just need to be aware, okay, hate the Democrats, whatever, but that doesn't necessarily mean that someone else who hates the Democrats is your friend.
This brings up the illusion of independence. And by the illusion of independence, I'm not talking about actual independent, politically independent people, by whom I mostly mean traditional non-voters. Traditional non-voters are the true political independents. Most of the people in the United States, and these numbers, by the way, are why the Democratic Party believes that certain votes are theirs to which they're entitled to. It is true that of the people who actually vote, the people who say they're independent actually tend to consistently vote for one side or the other. It's like 8% of people who say they're independent actually vote like independents in any clear way. Now, there are reasons for this. Reason number one is that if you truly are a quote unquote independent leftist, but you believe the lesser evil theory of liberal democracy, then you're always going to cast this harm reduction vote for a Democrat if you live in a swing state. And there's no way that a third party, and this is why electoralism is not our future, because this is a cultural problem that can only be broken by cultural solutions which take a lot of effort, because to change the culture, you have to build a new working class culture that embraces all the things that you want that culture to embrace. You have to build a pro-Black, pro-Indigenous, pro-queer working class culture. If you do not have that, then you cannot advance the interests of the Black, the Indigenous, the queer, and the working class. If you want, you have to remember that disabled people are working class. They are disabled workers. They are people who would be working if they were not disabled, or who are working despite their disabilities. You have to remember all of these things, and you have to live them in a real way and organize around them and build a culture that people want to be part of. And this is very hard for middle-class white people who don't really get interface a lot with people who don't share a very narrow set of values and experiences. And it's not that they're bad people. It's not about whether they're bad people. It's not even that the petty bourgeois are a bad class. I talk about the petty bourgeois a lot, and I think sometimes people might think that I'm trying to stigmatize the petty bourgeois. I'm not. I'm trying to describe certain processes and how they happen specifically in this segment of society and why. That said, how you act within the system is not entirely about whether you're a good or a bad person. A lot of it is about how you see yourself and how you want to see yourself. And people who really want to see themselves as a good person, but who are not comfortable with actually being a good person, will then twist themselves into real hypocrisies and contradictions. And they harm themselves as much as they harm society and as much as they harm marginalized people. But this social tendency is real and needs to be understood and dealt with. We need a society this is why we need a classless society. The problem is that some of the people who would most benefit from a classless society are not going to embrace it until, number one, they feel they absolutely can't fight it anymore. And number two, they actually do benefit from it. And part of the problem in this tension is that it can be very hard to make sure that the people fighting against a system actually benefit from it, because they're fighting against the system and you have to defeat them on some level in order for the system to be able to work to their benefit. But do they see their defeat as being in their interests? And so these are hard questions. And people who aren't willing to engage with these hard questions are going to take very ideological and doctrinaire positions. And this is why some of these arguments have to be made on a class level and not a personal level, because the tendency is social and the only antidote is a different culture. And that culture, the number one principle, that culture has to embrace everyone who wants to belong to it. You have to really make your values universal if you want them to be universal. You can't just say, I see all people the same. You have to embrace everyone's humanity. And by embracing everyone's humanity, let's be completely clear. You have to treat everyone like they're white. And what I mean by that is cops have to treat everyone the way they treat a certain sort of middle-class white person. Bureaucracies have to treat everyone the way they treat a certain middle-class white person. If if everyone is not held to the same basic standard on the basis of their humanity, and then people who need equity are not given social equity to get to where they need to be, then you can't ever have that classless society and you can't ever have equality. But the problem is our system is so colored. Ha ha ha, pun intended. Our system is so colored that we cannot see past all these issues that the class reductionists want to call distractions when they are actually central to the cultural problem we are fighting against, which is that the culture we live under has been crafted by the dictatorship of capital to protect the interests of the people at the top of society's hierarchy. They happen to be white, which means the system is white supremacist in order to sustain the white people at the top. It breaks down that simple. Now, to defeat white supremacy, you have to defeat capitalism. But to defeat capitalism and white supremacy, you have to build an anti-white culture. And by anti-white, I mean you cannot have a privileged class. You have to treat everyone like they're white. And I believe Seth is going to have to go soon. He said he had a fairly hard deadline that I know we've gone over. So I believe that's the primary reason he's dropped out. It looks like he is coming back. But I do want to address that we do have to wrap up. And I know that I've taken Seth more time than necessary. And that
I don't know what happened though. It just completely went away off my screen. I was just sitting there and I was gone. So that's
it's the technical difficulties that even MSNBC can't avoid. I don't know how many times I've seen the basic problems with connectivity and sound checks. I swear that MSNBC programs that are used to dealing with really high-tech stuff have a real problem getting that video conference on the computer onto their big screens some days. But with that aside, I do want to say, I realize we have to wrap up soon. I do want to ask you what you think of the monologue I was off on. But I mean,
I thought it was a
society that treats everybody the way that white people with a certain basic economic security are treated right now.
Well, and that's the thing, is that I think you were talking about changing our culture, changing society. I think that some aspects of society need to be, like, let's look at policing. Maybe the system itself is geared in a way that we have to completely, we might have to rethink so many systems that we have. It's an entire process, right?
So this is where we come right into it. Does our system of carceral criminal justice, is it even capable of treating everybody like they're a white person of a certain economic class? Is the criminal justice system capable of treating every defendant like Donald Trump?
No, it's not. It's not. I'll answer that. No, it's not. And I think that's, these are the issues that we're always trying to address, and that get, like, we're talking about, like,
Let's be clear. By treating every defendant like Donald Trump, I mean bending over backwards not to actually charge him or indict him until the last possible moment.
Right, you look at the people who get charged, and
whether he will be on trial during the election season or not.
Yeah, well, and here's, that's the thing, is that you want to have a system that works across the board. And when people talk about the persecution of Trump, I think that it's like you said, it's one of those issues, again, where if they were to act in a way that was universal, treat everybody who was in that position who committed a crime as a criminal and act as such, then we wouldn't have these issues where people could twist it and say, well, clearly this is just persecution, and exonerate Trump on that basis. And so we've got a lot of work to do to just live up to our own actions. And
but if we were to, but I want to point out that if we were to take conservatives at their word, that what they really want is just the same rights for everyone, no special treatment for anyone, then that would mean that in a conservative world, the legal system should be treating everybody the way they're treating Donald Trump right now.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
doing everything they possibly can to protect his privileges rather than taking firm action against his behavior, which is clearly toxic to their own rules and system, but which they are hesitant to enforce because they break the same rules.
Yeah, well said. Perfect.
The difference is that Trump does things on a scale people can't ignore because Trump wants attention.
He's a showman. That's the main issue. It's like you said, you look at what happened during his presidency. It wasn't that much different from a regular Republican, but he had a flair for the dramatic. And that's also why the white supremacists have kind of rallied around this guy, and he's been able to give new life to that movement because he does have that quality that people are drawn to, like a moth to a flame, what good or bad, clearly bad in this instance. But that's why, and I think that people need to understand that aspect of who he is when we're talking about how to combat people like him in the future.
Puts on a show. It's not always a good show. It's not a show that appeals to 60% of the people out there. But if you fall within that band of people who are influenced by it, it's a really, really impressive show.
And that's exactly what they're saying. It's like, woo, that guy's great.
I can't say enough that it is about an emotional feeling and not rational thought. And
that's it.
And that there is a rational decision made to accept irrationalities as truth in order to maintain unity of purpose and action. This is what makes Nazis so dangerous. They have made a rational choice to be irrational because it gives them a huge advantage. Now, eventually it catches up with them and things fall apart. It's not sustainable, but it does a tremendous amount of damage while it lasts. And it can last a long time until it becomes completely unsustainable. And when it appears to go away, as long as the same basic class structure remains in place, it's always trying to come back. You can't defeat fascism forever without changing the system that creates fascism.
That's right.
And that's really, I think, the best place for us to stop today. I won't even monologue after the show. You cannot defeat fascism for good in a system that perpetuates fascism. There we are. Seth, I want to thank you for joining the show.
Thank you.
Everybody who's in the chat, I want to thank you for commenting. Everybody who's watching, who watched live, I want to thank you for watching. Please share on Twitter. Please like and share on Substack. Please like on Patreon even. I mean, the more attention we get, the better. We're out here. I don't want to go anywhere. It's still paying for itself. As long as it keeps paying for itself, I'm going to keep doing it. But that said, we really need to get out there. We really need to build people watching and eyes. And ultimately, we really need to build some more patrons. Remember, it's Patreon, Eclectic Radical. I want to thank everybody. I really appreciate it. And I will tweet at you.